Namaste and in la catch, and welcome to this week's episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and as always, I'm going to reflect on the Namaste and in la catch. Namaste comes from the Sanskrit, spoken, it's called Brahmi, and it means the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. Now, just for a moment, assume that to be true. What's that mean? What's that spark within you that's in another that you can recognize in both of you? In la catch comes from the Mayan culture, another ancient one, and it simply means I am another you. So in those points of light that are all part of the great light, you're reflecting each other. Think about that when you meet people, talk to people, share with people, and how that difference might show up in your life to imbue it with greater happiness and joy. Don't believe me? Test it for yourself. All right, so this week's guest is Tonya Dawn Recla. She is a long time, short time, forever friend that we met back in 2016 or actually quite or a little bit before that. She is the executive director of Superpower. She's also the producer and host of their podcast, which is phenomenal. She is the CEO of the Recla Group, which is about corporate counterintelligence. Sounds like we need that, right? And she's on the faculty for CEO Space, which Bernie Dorman began decades ago. Tanya, I'm just so excited about being able to talk to you. Thank you for being here.
Oh, well, it's always a pleasure. It's been too long. I'm really glad we get to share some space again today.
Oh, absolutely. And it's going to be a wonderful apocalyptic one.
For sure. For sure. Everybody hold on. It's coming.
Yeah. So speaking of coming, let's start with, the theme of the show is looking into the depths of what keeps us afraid, angry, ignorant, and immobile. More so looking at how we connect with the inner life, the inner voice, the knowing, the intuitive side in order to bring that outside and have a better reflection of making the without as the within. So how did that start for you?
Great questions. I've been kind of in the middle of my own life review here recently. We teach it as this life regression, as we understand the inspired self and the actualized self and what happens when they come together and work together. And so every step along the way, there's a new origin point, like, oh, that's why I am the way I am, or, oh, that's what happened, right? And it's like, yes, and like, there's all these layers. And so I got real comfortable in the multidimensionality of things. And so at this point, probably the Big Bang is where it all started for me. It is like,
great answer. Great start, actually. Yeah.
like what else are you going to point it back to? When you come into awareness of yourself at these higher echelons, it's not so much the discovery as it is simply the remembering. And it kind of is trippy, right? Your avatar is like, wait, what happened? Wait, where was I? What did I do? And it's like, how is this possible? And so my avatar has a very clear story this lifetime through, academia, espionage, right? All kinds of fun things into superpowers. And it looks good on paper and it sounds impressive. And it was the forging necessary for my avatar to be able to come into alignment with that inspired self. So I don't know that I can come up with a decent origin point other than God and I had some rocky relationships there throughout my childhood and adolescence into my teen years. And he started talking, or they started talking, I guess. At that point, we change it up as much as we want to. Right? I'm all about, like, we should probably honor God's pronouns, right? I'm pretty sure in the beginning of the Bible, it was pretty clear that they was the preferred pronouns, but I like to be radical and push buttons. So I would just say that the harmonizing with the self turned into the ability to teach it. And we teach the inside out game in our material. I have an awareness of actually turning myself inside out. I worked at it and worked at it and worked at it. And then when it happened, it was like
eternal Taurus, right?
That's exactly right. And what that started was it gave birth to SIFA, which is the creative energy field activation, which is exactly how we do it here. And that's been, everybody's like, okay, but how do we do it? Okay, but how? Like, everyone's in agreement. How do we do it? it finally landed, and it was like, okay, now we're ready. We can go and we can actually prepare people's avatars for holding that vibration as they do their work here in this world. And so it's been a wonderful, wonderful, wild ride.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
superpowers was really the key.
Absolutely. And it really spurred me too. I remember, and we reflected on this earlier, when we had our chat and you asked me directly, what's your superpower? I hadn't even considered what it might be. And yet with no hesitation whatsoever, I blurted
That's
out
right.
vulnerability.
We
Right.
know, we know. It's just no one's ever asked,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
And I was so
exactly.
resistant to that. I was like, that's a silly question. I went back and forth with Source a number of times on this one, and I was like, come on, like seriously, like,
Well, you
and it
mentioned
does magic.
it actually does. And there's science behind it. And I'll reflect a little bit about that because you talked about multidimensionality, and that's kind of whoa, what does that really mean? Right. And
Ooh, wait,
yes,
there are advanced courses, people. Trust me, you can
well,
keep
and there's
playing.
also quantum models. Vernon Nepi and Edward Close put together what they called the triadic dimensional distinction vortical paradigm, and it states that, or posits, that consciousness, space, and time are tethered across 9 dimensions for our human experience. It doesn't exclude other dimensions, just that we have 9 that are available. Well, it almost directly reflected a personal experience I had going through a process that William Swigard developed back in the 1950s called multi-plane awareness. And guess how many planes it deals with?
I'm thinking
9.
9.
Right. And so, it's like we have our 5 senses that are finer and finer across those 9 planes of consciousness with greater activity and accessibility to that big bang you spoke of earlier. And that from my own experience, I learned that we are cosmic consciousness condensed into form. A little unaware of that, but because of the questions we ask, right, we eventually kind of, okay, well, maybe this is possible. And that through that concerted effort to really be skeptical and inquiring of it, kind of whacking away at the truth until we have no choice but to accept what is and acquiesce to that. That's where the vulnerability came in, right? Because it's
That's right.
part of that process. And so all those kinds of things. There's also another woman, a Russian academician, Valentina Morovina. My wife turned me on to her, and she did a dissertation on the global mutation in humanity from a scientific standpoint, and
Brilliant.
of the discoveries she made over the last decade and a half, that she was able to assemble and say, okay, here's the evidence that we are actually going through an ascension process, and it's natural.
Love it. I love it. I love hearing about it. I'm not familiar with any of those bodies of work. They keep me pretty isolated. Like my world is sort of my own space. I love the affirmations and the obviousness of the similarities, right? That's what I started noticing early on with the podcast show, like from 2016 on, right? Hundreds of people who work in these spaces in politics, in science, in Hollywood, right? Like in we're everywhere. Like we are awake and we're everywhere. And what that means is that we have a real opportunity to lift. And that's the space. The challenge is that our job is to pour into all of those people who are doing that work. And so the tools necessary to do work that most people have never even heard about or even thought about didn't exist. The tools had to be here. So we had to bring all of those. I do a lot of reverse engineering, a lot of translation from other spaces into here, and a lot of trial and error. We're social scientists, and we have to be.
Absolutely. And social architects too.
For sure.
We've, I feel like I've been in 47 years of prep work since I first had my awakening that gave me the understanding that we're cosmic consciousness condensed into form. And so I began looking at, okay, where's the continuity and the consistency that brings the coalescence of self-actualization and self-realization into the practical and pragmatic functional capacity we have in the world. And that's kind of where we're at now. You mentioned the vision that you had earlier. Describe that again, right? Rather than me just talking about it, I think it's valuable.
Sure. So I'll preface it by saying my marching orders were to awaken millions, bring everyone into the same conversation, and get everyone to work together. Those were decades. I don't even. We could go through this timeline, but it was a while ago that I went round and round with
You
the
got the
divine on
same
that.
message I did, only mine was in the form of, you will help facilitate a new world order and it will happen in your lifetime. I understood that to be harmony among people and planet. So continue.
Great translation. Love is our mission is kind of how we frame it up, because that's what we found in all practicality. And I get it. It's like, it's great to have these woo-woo theories. But again, I was an academician. I was a counterintelligence agent. I was a soldier. Like, I needed processes that worked. Even when Justin and I got into, my husband, as you know, got into the corporate counterintelligence world, even there, I was like, we won't teach anything unless it works 100% of the time, because it's destroying businesses when we throw these theories at them and they can't keep up, right? So
the interesting thing is
responsible.
What you came up with is a scientific method application.
That's right.
Right? And it's not about the data, it's about the process.
That's exactly right. We had to be willing to suspend our disbelief long enough to understand how divine design works and how to develop processes. And it was no more important than in the network. And so I'll get to that here in a second. But the vision that you're speaking about was for years and years, I kept seeing this swirling vat of chaos. And a bunch of us were around the edges, right? Just a bunch of individuals peering into this vat of chaos with lighted eyes was the phrase. I was trained how to balance my eyes, how to look through light, how to hone the light, how to, it was like basic training all over again, but in upper echelons, right?
Sure, which
I can't make this stuff up, right?
A much more multidimensional way.
Far more applications from that space for sure.
Yeah.
And then in this vision, there was a moment where, and it was basically during the pandemic, when all of a sudden I started seeing like heads turning to the left and to the right. And it was this awareness is dawning that, oh, wait, there's more of us, right? Because it's really easy to think that you're it. When you're it in your sector, like I love to remind people.
I'm going to offer a pun intended with your middle name. It was Dawn Ing.
But I like it. I like it. You're sharp. I see where you're going with that. Very funny.
Names are important, right?
That's right. That's right. And so this concept of the lighted eyes, right, and kind of looking to our left and our right during the pandemic was when that kind of started picking up, and it indicated like it's okay for us to realize this. And as I was mentioning, it's a lot of times it's this idea of, yes, you're the one, but you're just not the only one, right? And I got to be the bearer of that news to a lot of people I interviewed on the podcast who were pretty convinced they were the only ones tapping into this information.
It's the one mind individuated.
That's right. And I got to invite them to listen to the network and listen to all the other people who thought that they were the one or who had that awakening as well.
Oh, yeah.
And so as we look at each other and we see that there's more of us, right? It took a little bit. And then over time, we started working together, right? To where it's like, oh, that lit up piece and this lit up piece. The biggest challenge is before this, we didn't really have a mechanism to be able to identify each other. Right. And so we kept wanting to make other people into people who understood these concepts. It's super important to kind of have like an ability to check in with others in resonance. Otherwise, it's easy to believe like the mental and emotional layers. And so that's where SIFA came in, where we can connect each other into this vibrational space. Who's there, who's holding it, not just speaking to it, but who can really hold it. And that's when you can move into collaboration.
Mm-hmm. And I will totally validate and corroborate your COVID kind of evolutionary process, right? I turned to my wife in March of 2020 and said, I really hope the obsession on self-hygiene and sequestration will get people to turn inward and self-examine. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, many did. Now you were talking about the silo effect, right? Because I wrote an article years ago called The Messianic Complex, right? Kind of a play on the Messianic complex.
I love it.
Because we all go through that. We first discover, oh, I'm the one, and then we have to check in and balance the ego with that and turn it into we go. instead, right? Because, we aren't islands unto ourselves, we're a collective, and we have that capacity for engagement at a much more concerted and in concert level, because we're ready to do so, and we've gone through at least most of the, oh, it's all about me, and gotten rid of that to, oh no, wait a minute, it's all about us.
That's right. That's right. That's a big part of why we do the experience in our space, because once people tap into that, they will continue to seek it. How do you catalyze awakening for people is you let them touch it, you let them feel it. And so
It's a visceral experience.
That's right. And so that if you go to superpowerexperts.com, you can come to the experience. It's free. Like, I cannot express upon everybody enough how important it is for you to seek yourself right now, and to know how to see yourself beyond the self. If these are concepts that sound weird to you, and like you don't know what it is, then start educating yourself, because the world's not going back to where it was. The genie's not getting put back in the bottle, and we can't tap ourselves back into the matrix. It's impossible.
Right.
So move forward. And forward looks like what everybody's talking about, which is there is a whole other world. And it's hard to reconcile when you're looking from one to the other, or when you're straddling both. But it is possible to connect the two through us, right? We're the only bridges between these two worlds. The world, right, that we think exists, the actualized space, which exists because we keep making it real, and the awareness that we're beyond this. I love that you talked about the condensation, or the concentration of energy and effort that it is to take form. We don't have to work that hard. Tons of our energy is exerted when we identify in our physical form. If you allow yourself to expand beyond that and awaken into this multidimensionality concept, oh my gosh, you get to breathe, right? And you know yourself.
Well, we get out of the binary thinking.
That's right.
And move into at least tertiary.
Yeah, at least. Let's just go one more notch, right?
Right. And that's quite enough just to make that step.
That's right.
Now, we do talk about these things. We've had the visceral experiences. They're often ineffable to begin with, right? And they create awe that we really, it's like, okay, what just happened, right?
That's right.
Now, in that, could you reflect on pick out an instance, and I'm sure there's one popping up even as I mentioned this, maybe even right before, because that's how, we don't know time, space, and
that's right.
Consciousness are tethered. So what can you identify a simple event that others might understand the process from a personal perspective?
Which process? The inside out one, the advanced, all of it?
Well, some experience, an experience that you had that is an example of what we've been talking about.
Perfect. So I have a couple that come right to mind. One is really great because it's exemplified through Neva. Neva's 12 years old now. She's been in this work since birth. She, her presence in our existence was really the big invitation of, are you going to step up, or are you going to crush all of this stuff in her? And because
and she's pushing both you and Jessica. That's right.
Exactly. If you haven't met my daughter, no, anyway, but
I've met her.
Yes, quite remarkable being. So for those of you who haven't had a chance to, it's worth sort of paying some attention to where she's been, what she's done, and what she's doing. She has her new podcast, Leave It to Neva. And what's remarkable about it isn't, oh my gosh, my daughter's so amazing, but she's a great example of what's possible. And it's easy to say, okay, well, we had the perfect situation, right? Justin and I were able to both leave our jobs and start entrepreneurship, which we knew nothing about. It didn't seem easy to us, but looking back, it's like, okay, we had kind of the perfect storm, right? And we made some decisions early on to make sure she got to stay involved. So we did some very deliberate things that we felt guided to do that allowed for this to happen. Fast forward to where we're at now. And what I can say is that if any single one of us can do it, then it means it's possible for all of us.
Exactly.
Yes, Neva's situation is unique. Yes, maybe my situation is unique. Maybe Justin's situation, I don't know. But it doesn't matter, because what superpowers have taught us and what the oneness concept teaches us is that that interconnectedness isn't just a pretty picture or a ball and chain. It's opportunity to get to know and to experience in more diverseness and more richness, right? And if you allow this, in our world, we named it the 137 principle, which is the one cannot exist without the whole cannot exist without the one, and only through oneness can we know the creator. Essentially what that means is that your journey into oneness stops unless you're willing to accept the fact that everybody else is you also. One cannot be left out of that, otherwise
Back to
you're
the
left
in-law
out of it.
catch.
Yeah,
right?
That's exactly right. I loved how you were sharing that. And so one of the processes, Neva came home one day. She had kind of gotten, she had geared herself up. She had this amazingly remarkable conversation, which I can't even get into right now, but it was a conversation that most adults would run away screaming and crying from. And she was like, I'm not going to miss this opportunity to speak truth into this situation. And she said, Mom, I sat there and it was like, all of my stories were coming up, like, and I just went, blah, 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 no. And then I played it out and I was like, no. And I was like, okay, no, this isn't going to happen. I'm not going to lose this opportunity. And I was like, oh my gosh, you were like clearing your cache, right? And she's like, yeah, I like cleared my own cache, but not just stories, right? She is in awareness, right? That inside out game is what you were asking about. She's in enough awareness of herself and she can feel and know all of the various levels of connection, right? Inside of us, mental, emotional, cellular, and vibrational. She knows herself at a vibrational level to clear any stories that we implanted in her. Collectively, we implanted in her. Socially, we collect, everybody's included into this nice little mix here. And she's saying, no, I'm not having it, right? And so she identified a process that she can use that allows her to speak truth, regardless of how intimidating a situation may feel to her. That's a really practical example of the benefit of having done this walk. In terms of actually doing the work itself, for those of us who didn't have the opportunity to be fostered and mentored in an environment where source was the authority, right? Justin and I were very clear. We were proxies until she could go direct to source. The best thing we can do for our children is get them directly to source so they have that relationship. She doesn't come to us first.
Right. And I want to draw attention to the choices that the two of you made to do so from a parental place. And this is the all-important one, to be fully present and vulnerable in your nurturing of that budding consciousness in Neva, right?
That's right.
And we as parents have that, I feel, obligation. And most of us tend to kind of pull back from that because we don't have manuals, right? We've never done this before.
That's right.
We don't know what to do. We're scared for, the health and well-being of our children, grandchildren. And now for me, I got 6 great grandkids.
Wow, so, congratulations.
Thank you. And yet it makes those choices all the more important, to use a Moody's term, for our children's children's children.
Well, when you start to understand energetics, it's undeniable. When you can see how your energetic output is impacting not just others around you, but the world at large and what you're capable of experiencing, then you have 2 options, right? You can resist that and continue to do what you've always done, knowing that you're responsible for creating the outcome, or you can start making some changes. I'm kind of over the idea that we don't know what to do. I kind of hit this point not too long ago where I said, okay, I've talked to literally thousands of people who have admitted that all they really want is closeness and authentic relationships and love.
To love and
every
be loved.
Single one of them will say, okay, that's great, but the world isn't that way, right? How do we do it? And the answer is in the very question itself, is that we first have to be it. You can't expect anything from the
Precisely.
world that you're not willing to do. And it's time that we own up to that. Every kindergartner knows how to create a better world. Live and let live is not a difficult concept. It's a wonderful mantra that identifies all of the ways that we don't do that. And if
Right.
we're not willing to face that as individuals, as groups of people, as cultures, as subcultures, as whatever we want to call it, I've been in this space for decades. In-group, out-group dynamics happens everywhere we look. We get to choose if we're going to dehumanize people or if we're going to connect into them. End of story. When you make that choice, you do know exactly how to do it. And if you continue to view parenting from the vantage point of it's just your responsibility, it's all on you, you have no one to lean into. Your children have no hope to find any sort of authority or guidance in the creator because you're not modeling it. If you honestly think that parenting is your responsibility, then your kids are kind of screwed because you're fallible. You're going to mess up and they know it and you know it. We started there like, hey, look, like we're going to figure this out together. Like
Take
we're
the
very
village.
smart people. That's right. And we're going to find people. We taught her early on, go to the expert. If you have a question, go find an expert in that field and ask them. Mom and dad
are, that's the epitome of the wisdom of visionary experiences in as an entrepreneur, right?
That's right.
You go to somebody who's been down the path and you ask them questions, and virtually 100% of the time, they're more than glad to share that with you.
She did over 100 episodes on superpower kids with mentors, thought leaders, before she ever had a school teacher. we homeschooled. She interviewed them all. I was like, go ask them questions. I didn't walk all those walks. Go figure it out, find your life within it. And I think it does take incredible confidence as a parent to allow your child to have some space.
Absolutely.
Justin and I were both fairly developed. I was later in life when Neva came along. I didn't need her to complete me. I didn't need to vicariously live through her. So our situation was very different. Justin will tell you with his first marriage, our older two kids, that wasn't the case with him, right? So he got to see the juxtaposition of what happens when you solidly know who you are before you start trying to teach someone else who they are, right?
Well, it's emotional maturation as well as emotional intelligence that really plays the key roles in that maturation process. So wonderful example of the parenting side of things. Let's turn it into organizational and look there. When you're in these let's say meetings, which basically is kind of the committee in your head that is in front of you now, right? Look at it from that perspective.
That's right.
How do you, or how does one be quiet and silent in the moment and then be attentive to when the disturbance takes place and how to call it out in order to evolve it into a better resonance in the group?
Oh, I so love these questions because they give me an opportunity to really see the processes that I've been through and how I do it. It's become something that happens all at the same time. And I like your question because the evolution of it wasn't that way. And so it's really important to note that I can do a lot of things all at the same time. But I mean, I've been training and training and training and training and training. This is my life's walk. Like there's not a moment of my existence that isn't dedicated to it. And so the process was exactly what you spoke to, which is first learning that stillness, right? Which means you have to be able to find it. You can't gauge resonance if you're not aware of your own energetic output. Justin and I used to teach this at Counter Intel Agents, it's if you don't know your biases, your stereotypes, or even if we just take it back up a few notches to the mental and emotional levels, if you don't know your thoughts and your emotions, which a lot of people don't, they have no idea what they're outputting. I love social media. Like nobody realizes what they're broadcasting. You're like, I know what you're saying, but let me tell you what you're actually communicating.
Talk about
here,
diversity, right?
That's right. And so it if you have a business, it really pays to know this stuff because you're communicating a lot more than you think you are.
And
And
words
so
cast spells.
that's exactly right. You can only experience in your world what you're telling the world you believe is possible. And we do that through our speech. So it went from using very logic-based words to feeling words. And the process goes like this. This feels really important to plant here. So when we're in our minds, and most of us are trained in our minds, right? I had communication degrees, like critical thinking, intelligence career. Like I was a
Right.
really good thinker. I'd invest a
Well,
lot
we
of
live
time
from
and
here
money.
up, so that's
That
where.
energetically.
Yeah.
That's right. And most people don't realize that head energy only goes out about 3 inches. So we can't connect with each other in that space. There's only one way we can really share thoughts in any sort of conceptual way, and that's by going to the cloud, going into that divine intelligence together. And so we train that process. At that level, we speak of things like, this is what I think. This is my opinion, right? It's that kind of diatribe. When we get into the emotional space, right, we learn how to use emotion words. But the transition into that is a lot of times what we'll do is we'll replace the word think and say feel. So I feel that, and then we'll give an opinion, right? It's sort of a transition point until we start to feel the resonance doesn't match up.
Right.
Now we start
That's where the
feeling
cognitive
ourselves.
dissonance shows up.
That's right. So we have these checks and balances within our system naturally if we learn how to use them.
Mhm.
And so when we learn that, then we start automatically transitioning to using more feeling words. Oh, I'm feeling sad. Oh yeah, I'm feeling sad. Okay, got it. And then another layer opens up once we get comfortable there, and that's the sensing layer. The first step is usually we'll say, oh, I'm sensing this, or I'm aware of this, but then we're actually explaining an emotion.
Right.
Because we're still attaching
Well,
into that. But
and that
eventually
touches on the indigenous first brain. Not to cut you off, I just want to include this real quick. That's the indigenous philosophy that's also Asian, of the first, second, and third brains, the gut, the heart, and the head.
Beautiful. Perfect. So there's those alignments.
Yeah.
And as we move into that vibrational level, we'll start saying something like sensing, but describing the emotion until we feel the discrepancy there. Then we start to learn vibrational words. Once you understand the vibration of words, you will never, ever, ever be okay letting something land that isn't in resonance for you. And that is a walk. Again, most people are
Right.
still talking about their thoughts and their opinions. That's fine. But trust me when I say there are other places you're going to need to get to if you actually want to be able to gauge your own resonance, which is what allows me to sit in all kinds of spaces, in all kinds of meetings with all kinds of chaos and hostility, and still be able to find that place, still be able to respond. Slowly and surely, I turned every single aspect of myself over to source to use when appropriate and when it's necessary.
Right. Yeah, there's a process that a lot of conversationists talk about, and that is the 3 and the 8 second rule. You know, you pause for 3 seconds before you respond to something, and if there's deeper inquiry that needs to happen as you assemble your thoughts, you wait for 8 seconds. So before you open your mouth, right? And that automatically gets you to process what you're thinking, and you don't necessarily have to wait till you speak something to know what you're thinking.
All the processes are
Right.
really phenomenal ways of explaining how we train our avatars. The faster way is to go and reverse engineer it, to go to source, to go to oneness, to find yourself there and to walk back from that place. That's what allows you to know yourself as that divine self. If you're not in that space, if you don't even know how to do that, then keep walking forward. However, it's not just training the avatar. Allow yourself also that time. We call it PMCSing from a military term. We snagged it and turned it around. Prayer, meditation, contemplation, and stillness. If you don't have one of those practices, preferably all 4 in some capacity, start learning it, because that's the only way you can come outside of yourself and get that fast track back. I know a lot of you are leaders right now and you're struggling. You were struggling because you're behind the power curve, because you weren't doing that walk. Maybe you were ignoring it. Maybe now is the time. There's a quicker way to do this stuff. Go direct to source and come back from that direction. Personal development will get you there, but at this point, it is the slow track.
Agreed. And that is available. And
oh, yeah.
The more you practice one of those 4 disciplines that you mentioned, the faster it's going to happen.
That's right.
And
SIFA helps because it centers you. There are other modalities. The challenge I have with a lot of other modalities is they're designed to train the avatar, which is fine. But if we're not acknowledging that that's just part of what we are, right? We already know all this stuff. Like to keep pretending that we don't know, it says, I refuse to identify as my divine aspect. At some point, it's just egotistical. And that sounds weird to hear. Like, wait, not identifying as the divine is egotistical? And it's like, yes, because at some point, if you even know what we're talking about here, that is yourself pulling you back because it's afraid.
Yeah,
That's
it's the little self as opposed to the big self, the small S as opposed to the big S. Now, let's unpack avatar. Okay, because a lot of people hear that from Tom Campbell.
Who?
Tom Campbell and his book, My Big Toe, which is...
I don't know, so explain it to me.
Tom is a physicist. He actually began his work with developing the audio stuff for Bob Monroe and the Bob Monroe Institute, or Monroe Institute, in exploring out-of-body experiences. Now, later in life, Tom developed this notion that he's a left brainer trying to explain a right brain, or that he's trying to explain a right brain world to a left brain thinker, right? And so it's very elaborate. But what he talks about is the avatar and how we're able to play the video game through the avatar once we understand that that's what we have to do.
Perfect. Yep. That's exactly how we see it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like a video. We just did a reclamation episode. I don't know if it's out yet, called Gaming the Game of Life, right? And that is, it's like you get to improve your avatar. There's that's why our program has optimized your avatar. It helps us keep it from being so incredibly personal. Like this whole avatar is very much on purpose for causes much bigger than I could have come up with. I just got to, like, finally I just gave in and said, you know what? I'm changing my goal from like figuring out who I am to simply optimizing myself so I get to stay awake for the ride.
Right.
Every time I optimize myself, I get to discover a new layer. It means all of this stuff is happening all the time. We're just too dense to notice. Like, and I don't mean dense like not intelligent. I mean dense. Literally, we're too dense. Our frequency, our energy is too dense to be able to keep up. So we just check out. But if you can stay awake and stay aware, again, why I meditated the gym. I practice this stuff like I make it a game. How can I hold myself? Right? When you know that you either energetically manipulate an environment or are being energetically manipulated by it in every single situation, you get to kind of step back and go, huh, well, what am I creating? Right? Like, what am I bringing into? So I take incredible responsibility about the energy that I bring into a place, not out of consideration for everybody else, although that's a very polite thing to do. If that's all you can get to, then do it for that reason. But because I know that I get to create what my experience is.
And you get to create what you're... Go ahead.
If I'm shining discontent to the world, then that's all I'm going to see back. That sounds like none fun.
Exactly. None fun at all. And in the fundamental realm, we have the ability of actually paying attention to our thinking. Now, this is where I've taken it to, is that I've become so acutely aware of what I'm thinking that I examine its vibratory position, right, when the thought comes, because I can feel the difference in my body. You know, and speaking of that, I had an interview with Jeffrey Mishlev several years ago where it came out of my mouth, you know, our bodies are instruments that we don't know how to tune, let alone play in concert with yet.
That's right.
Yet.
Right? Oh, we know, but it collectively, you're right, we haven't been in the experience.
Well, we have some clues, and so when I recognize that diminishing resonance, it's not even resonance, that diminishing vibration of how I'm thinking about whatever it is, I immediately stop myself and I just replace it with an old Fritos jingle. I, right? Because it's I that I, right? And so that makes it the fun game of recognizing where I'm at and shifting it in the moment.
I love it. You were asking about business earlier, and it strikes me that it's also really important. We have a whole camp of people who come from the more traditional sectors, from business success, from money success, from actualization success, all of those spaces, who kind of look into these worlds and go like,
Yeah, they
like
think they're
what?
woo-woo.
Right. And it is very much, but it's unavoidable. You have no choice but to figure out how to harmonize these two
Well,
worlds in your
that's more
life.
the left brain thinking, right? The analyzation, the categorization,
That's
the
right.
compartmentalization, the
And we need both. We carry both.
oh,
But to their
absolutely.
credit, this whole space hasn't been very well organized, right? And so we bridge a lot. And to those folks, I really want to impress upon them, like this wasn't it wasn't enough for it just to be these fun experiences, right? Like I can teach mind reading, I can explain how thought energy works, I can explain who's predisposed and who's more susceptible and what happens if we don't even know that. Like that's all really, really fun, kind of sexy stuff that people love to talk about.
But we get
And at
stuck
the
in
end
the
of the day,
phenomena rather than
right.
understanding how to effectively engage it. And it's my understanding, and I'll ask this of you, do you find that in that place vibrationally, any kind of aggression is impossible?
I find that we have incredible checks and balances
Yeah.
internally, and how we are to be harmonizing with each other will always come out if we allow it to. Aggression for sure, it's not in resonance, right? It literally can't be. Now, there has been some energy that's come through me that is very powerful. It certainly emerges, right? Right. Don't mess with the divine feminine when she's on fire. And
Absolutely.
but it doesn't, it is so incredibly solid and real, and it's like it's
That it
undeniable in
resonates
its
rather than feels
congruency.
like it's an aggressive act.
That's exactly right. It becomes an aggressive act when the ego takes over. And a lot of times that happens because we get kind of uncomfortable with the power that we're capable of wielding.
Mhm.
And so again, in the example I was pointing to about the convergence factor, I want to plant the seed that early on we saw a real strong need for marrying divergence and convergence. It's what we have to do individually inside of ourselves. But as an organization, we have to be able to do this. We cannot do our work in the world if we can't figure out how to use particular structures and systems in the world in a way that's in harmony. And so we initially found a really difficult time trying to find consultants, trying to find advisors, because everybody was too dense to support the vision. Every time someone got their hands on it, it was like, womp, womp, and they would take it and drop it down. And so we had to do a lot of problems. That's why we built the platform. So the Superpower Network is the example in the real world of what we can do with this stuff. What happens when you build in divine design? So we went completely the opposite direction of the podcast industry. We had no platform. None of us had celebrity. None of us had platform. My first show started in 2016. Neva at 7 came on the next year with Superpower Kids because I wanted to see if we could train the process. So training
Right.
the 7-year-old was a good test of that. Beautifully applied, because the podcast was built on a way to like quadruple tap content. We didn't need the listens to be outrageous. We needed it to just be consistently providing good content in a way that supported our body of work. So for 4 years, we never looked at the ratings. We never looked at tracking anything. And when we did, it was already over 1 million downloads monthly. And Justin and I couldn't believe, in fact, we sat on that for months because we were pretty sure it was a mistake. And due diligence, right? We counter intel, we're like, no, no.
There's
So
the
we did.
awe and the inquiry.
That's right. And it's worth sitting in. And because what we discovered, of course, was it was very real. And then on and on and on it goes. And by 2021, when we went over 5 million downloads in a month, which people are like, okay, it's a network, like that's not that big of a deal. Our individual shows were all getting over between 100,000 and 400,000 downloads monthly, individually. Neva closed out 2020 with over 2 million downloads for Superpower Kids, right? Why am I sharing this? One, because it's a remarkable, miraculous journey of what can happen when you choose to hold to that standard, even in a world that tells you not to, even in a world that says it's impossible. I cannot explain it any other way than to say that the collaborative model, we paid attention to divergence and convergence, and we held it in the frequency in which it was intended. And
Mhm.
by doing that, the podcast is now in the top 1.5% of podcasts globally. And
That's awesome.
because we simply did our work, right? Because
Absolutely.
even in temptation, we didn't commoditize our listeners, right? We didn't put advertising on the network. Everything had to be a win-win-win scenario, or derailed everything. We know because we kept watching it, right?
Well,
But
and
that
that's
gave
where the
us
comes in. And by that, I mean the organic magnetization.
beautiful,
Right.
beautiful. I love that. And so, and that's important to know. Not just, I mean, the avatar conversation is super important as well, because that's the individual impact. Being able to move beyond yourself in the physical allows you to achieve your greatness. And I dare say potentially allows you to play the advanced courses here, which has been my experience. And the convergence in the business realm, in the success realm, in the actualization, in the can we put this into action, can we actually create change with it in this world, was also really important to prove. So we were proving the body of work. At the same time, we were proving the business models that support it. Both are absolutely necessary moving forward. If you're not keeping up with this, the tech side and the developmental side, as well as the consciousness side, so folks in that traditional sector, you can't ignore this. You cannot ignore the fact that a large portion of the population is training themselves to be at odds with the very things that you're creating.
So this brings to mind, all right, so, and this sounds oxymoronish to begin with, and yet so powerful ultimately. And I'm speaking of live and let live. We talked about this a little bit ago. It was founded by the Attorneys for Freedom law firm. Right? And that may sound a little oxymoronish, but when you think about removing all the barriers to entry into a world without aggression, that's simply got to be done through legal and legislative manner, right? That's the system that's there to do that. So to edify what you're talking about and stepping in, being able to play the larger game, you know, that 47 years of prep work that happened to me in the podcast that I'm doing now, I interviewed Mark Victor, who is the founder of Attorneys for Freedom. And I wasn't even aware, I've known Mark for a decade and a half, wasn't even aware that they had launched a world peace movement called Live and Let Live. There are two very basic principles. Live means eliminate aggression so that we can fully live. And the other side, that's the legal principle. The other side, the let live, is simply be a better human, right? And as that, I say right, because that ought to be self-explanatory, right?
Should be, right? It should be.
And so in order to do that, then you've got to step into the places that we're talking about and gradually bring yourself up to that level. Now, what I was eventually offered and accepted was the executive director position for the foundation and movement. And when I stepped in, we already had 30 chapters in 19 countries with virtually no promotion whatsoever. They just launched it in August of 2020 with a website. Here, pandemic, right? Just like many others that did. And so it grew organically. And so when I came in with another co-director, we were looking at, okay, how can we serve this with what we know and the expertise and the skill set that we have? And they turned out to be just extremely complementary. And she being, you know, the aspect of the divine feminine, and me hoping to portray the divine masculine in ways that are appropriate and serving to the needs of the larger picture. It is, man, it's such a joy, and yet a bit daunting, as you can imagine, and what you've gone through as well. And yet there it is, right? The universe set it up. So my only choice for me, from everything I know, was to step in and see where it goes, right?
And having prepared yourself to be able to do that, that's
the 47 years of prep work that have been excruciatingly fun.
That's a good way to put it. You definitely come out forged, but I'll tell you folks, the polishing process is very enjoyable. Like the forging, it's a thing. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and you do get to have everything here. Like it really is possible.
And the intense
if we
challenges
stop
are
accepting
temporary.
something less.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And the challenges are all temporary and transitory. It's just part of the process.
That's right. That's right. And you'll survive it. But I do think that that's why these communities are popping up, because a lot of us did it when no one else was. A lot of us did it when we felt alone. A lot of us did it when to talk about, I mean, I can't tell you how many people came on the show were like, I can't talk about this anywhere else. And I'm like, this is all I talk about. You can come and talk here, right? So giving people a place to talk about it was really important first, and saying, look, you're not alone. Because a lot of us stay in the shadows. You know, I don't know, witch burnings and hangings and crosses. Like, it's like, there's a lot of stuff in our collective consciousness that says it's not safe to really shine. Not in any real way. We have social media to thank for that, right? Cancel culture, everything. It's like, it's not safe to speak truth. And at some point, you just kind of get to a moment where you're like, at this point, it is not safe for me not to. And
Exactly.
so here
Exactly.
I go. And I had to make that switch. And I, you know, stayed out of social media for quite a while, and all of the things that we all do to kind of find that resonance to get our bearing. But once you've got it, go back in and use those channels for love. And if you start to feel depleted, you come to us and we will hug you and we will love you and we'll put a Band-Aid on it and we'll kick you back out the door to go do your work. And then you can come running back, because that's why we need these communities, so that we remember we're not alone. As individuals, we go into fear, we go into paralysis, we go into ego. Like, it's impossible for us to keep that, because we're all of that together as groups in shared intention, shared vibration. This is why we train groups and how to hold this. So if you're holding groups and you know you're not holding those vibrations, let us train you so you can go back and hold that in your groups. Please, 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 because it's going to make you so much more effective. This is why we have to do this work, because left to our own devices, we can only do what we think is best. Together, we're going to see a much more complete picture of ourselves, of each other, and be able to devise creative solutions, which we definitely need to be tapping into now.
Absolutely. And the phrase moving slow to move fast is
That's
totally
right.
appropriate, because we're used to this, you know, the rat race, right? Why are we calling ourselves rats? First of all, right? And
well, I don't know. I checked out of that a long time ago. That was my first indicator. I was like, no, thanks.
yeah, exactly. And so in that, you know, the finding silence, the slowing down, it allows things to happen more fluently, and it gives us the opportunity to be available for that, to listen, to engage, and to be aware of how the outer world really reflects where we're at internally, so that we can adjust accordingly.
For all the avatars that are sort of going, I don't want to slow down. Like, that's not my pace. I do things faster. You just don't know me. I
That's
don't do things
programming.
that way, right? Well, it's programming, but it's programming, but it's also foreshadowing. And what I mean by that is that if you have that ability, and if that's sort of one of your pacings, there's a solid chance that that will come back online.
Absolutely.
But what we're talking about here is that your experience with it is sort of like you know, the Flash and superpowers, right? It's like, you're solid, you're still, and the world is going brrr, right? That's how instant manifestation works. Like, you can actually you learn how to impact and influence the projection as it goes by you. You're standing still, essentially. That's the sense that you have, and the world's moving around you. But it does go very, 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 very fast when you're ready for it. The training, the slowing down of your internal mechanism is what allows you to play in some of these frequencies that you hear when I talk. These things manifest like this. Dun, 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 dun,
Well, for
if
me,
you
I've
can keep
always
up
heard
with
this
it.
high-pitched frequency, which I experienced again when I was in the light, you know, the iridescent, effervescent, high-pitched sensation of being in the oneness, and yet being able to sense the individuation, because I could think. Right?
I love you. That's Sifa. That is the creative energy field. I love that you're giving voice to it. That is our space. It is sacred creator space, and it is Beautiful. So it's a gift
Absolutely. And
that you
learning that at
experience that.
18 was a blessing and a curse because I
Mm,
was unable to articulate it and effectively until much later, as I grew to understand using the mechanisms of art and science and education and intelligence and business speak and all of those kinds of things, and acquiring the experience and education in order to be able to do so. That's the 47 years of, and raising a family and doing all of those kinds of things too. So there's this holistic
mm,
picture that we begin to discover and integrate over time based on our ability to see it, first of all, to recognize that, yeah,
that's right.
we are that individuated thread in the tapestry, and there is a tapestry.
That's right. Well, and we are the tapestry.
Exactly.
You can't escape it. I mean, and it really is the willingness to see yourself as the creator, in the creator, of the creator, and know how to hold all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of some parting thoughts is one of the most practical things you can do is be willing to notice your own contradictions and what you carry internally, not to judge them, not to think that you have to choose, but to hold the contradictions, because in holding them and seeing both, you find how to balance them. You are both. We are all both. Don't try to get rid of them. Ask, how do I hold both?
Right.
How do I hold both? And if one isn't congruent or in resonance anymore, you'll know. But almost I haven't had one yet in myself or in a client that didn't come into harmony and allow them to see the beautiful gift in what the experience of drawing those together comes from. My very first one was realizing I held an extreme contradiction about creation and evolution, that I held both to be true, and was living in a world that was wanting to impress upon me that you couldn't. And so I was like, I would flip flop, and I noticed the dynamic in Justin
The
and I too.
binary stuff again.
That's right. In couples, we see it, right? That's why in our couples program, we looked at this, because if you watch, and in just about every couple, you'll be conversating about something, and one of you will hold this perspective and one will hold this. And it's got to be something that the ego is not totally attached to. But if you pay attention, almost inevitably, you'll see the opposite happen, where you find yourself saying the exact same words that your partner was saying with just as much emotion and gumption behind it, and going, but you have to be able to observe these things. And then we notice, wait, this isn't personal to either one of us. It's an energetic program that exists in our relationship entity. How
Perfect
do we look at this
example.
differently?
Perfect example is my wife and I. She's from St. Petersburg, Russia. I'm from rural Indiana, right? She comes from, one of the meccas of the world, and was involved in that level of society there. But her father owned a huge restaurant in downtown St. Petersburg that was the attraction for everyone. And yet here my American views, we're taught that Russia's an enemy, right? And I never believed that, because we're all people.
Yeah.
And yet there are cultural differences that we've explored in our relationship, and the ability that we have to deepen that conversation. That doesn't mean we don't have the tickles or the moments of trauma, and yet we're able to step back from that and have a conversation about unpacking how that actually happened, so that it allows us to become more of a resonant field together.
Beautiful, which is so incredibly powerful. There's so much exponential power when we choose to do that together as
She's the
couples,
reason I'm
as
doing the
families.
show.
Well, you can tell her thank you on our behalf. So
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And thank you for that. I love the reflection and the fact that people are doing this. It is worth the pursuit, folks. It
Sure.
really is.
Absolutely. Speaking of pursuit, I want to reflect just one, because it doesn't always happen as quick as you would like. There is a process, and you have to acquiesce to everything will be there at its appointed time, right? So 1990, I started a similar show called One World on public access here in Phoenix. And I hoped someday I would be worthy of an interview with Bill Moyers or Jeffrey Mishlev, which were the two guys I wanted to emulate. 28 years later, I had my interview with Jeffrey. And it was
Beautiful.
just such a serendipitous and synchronistic activity that I had no part of. And then 2 years later, or 3 years later, in April of 2021, Luba says to me, you know, you really need to start talking to people again, right? Because she'd seen some of my one world issues and she knows the depth that it went to, which is kind of where we're at here, only there's a little more experience and wisdom at
That's
this
right.
age, because there's 30 years. I came off a 30-year hiatus to go back in because she felt it was time. She encouraged me to, and I was just waiting for that signal.
That's right. That's right. Well, I have my own partner here who gives me the signals too. So it's we're so valuable together. Justin and I do the apple flavored pomegranate show. It's our couples show, and that's what we talk about, is what the journey of oneness looks like together. We wrote it into our vows. You know, we knew from John when we met, I was like, dude, I'm going this way. Like, I'm on this path. I'm not coming off. Like, it's me and the creator, and I would love to walk with you. I would love to walk beside you. I'd love to see what we can do together, but I'm not sacrificing this ever. And I did it for him. I did it for Neva. And then that was a test. You know, it was easy to go into the programs.
Well, it reminds me of the guy a long time ago that said, you know, if you shall give up your life, you shall have it.
Who is that guy? Weird. I want him. That sounds familiar.
Yeah. Well, you know, then we get stuck on the messenger and not the message.
Of course. Well, and what's so funny is it's always the messengers who aren't caught up on the messenger. The messengers couldn't care less who the messengers are. It's just the message. It's those who don't want to identify as messengers that tend to focus on messengers. And it's like, well, you can do that, but historically that hasn't gone well. So we could keep doing it that way, or we could recognize, like, my orders were clear. It's like the business model. I got so many very clear instructions about it. Everybody had to be able to leave, like me, to include me, right? Which meant the business couldn't be dependent on me. Everybody had to be able to evolve to include the business model, right? Which is weird. We don't think that way. Had to be self-sufficient, sustainable. Like, all of these factors go into it, but they weren't the instructions on how to do it. They were simply, those are the natural byproducts that happen when you harmonize with divine design. We can try to make those things happen, kind of like trying to do the 10 commandments, or you can just kind of be one with source, and then naturally you just follow the 10 commandments, because you can't do anything but. So it's like, we've really been working too hard, I think, on this one. There is a quicker route. There's a faster way. We just have to start by first accepting that this world was created. And I prefer to believe it was created by a benevolent, energetic intelligence that loves us, because we are capable of love. So I believe that comes from the same place where we were crafted. I believe we were made in love. I believe we create in love. And if we start from there, what's possible? What can we do together from that place? Not ignoring all of the messiness and the humanity that we've been through. There's richness in there, but we don't have to be afraid to go in there and cry together and hold each other and hug it out, because we didn't know any better. We didn't know any better, and we let our egos take hold, and we did terrible things to each other.
It's all okay.
And we can learn to come through that, and we can learn how to really atone in a real way. We can learn how to unburden ourselves through forgiveness work. We have everything that we need to get out of the traps. At this point in time, I think I'm done saying people don't know what to do. And now I'm just going to say, okay, we know what to do. We all know that we want it. Let's just move forward and do it then. And if you don't know what to do, go train yourself, because we've all done that. And there are all kinds of ways and people that you can follow to do exactly that.
And it turns into a facilitation of getting people, places, and things to work together better.
That's right. And there are enough of us now that we can get moving. Everybody else is kind of going to have to catch up at this point.
Right. You mentioned we mentioned the tertiary aspect earlier, and I'd like to share a quick experience about that trinitized energy that is embedded in pretty much every world religion. And that was one of my questions. Why? Where did it come from?
And that's a fun one.
And one of my experiences, I was greeted by a guide that I'd met as a teenager, and he took me across the universe. It was an 8-minute trip, because there was a facilitator sitting next to me that timed it. And we arrived, and of course I'm asking him all kinds of questions on the way there. And we arrived at a solar system, or what appeared to be a solar system, with 3 huge luminous white spheres with a gold tinge and kind of rainbow sparkles. And there were a dozen smaller green spheres in orbit around it on a planar level. And as I'm watching this, I felt like Ellie in Contact, and how she was just in awe, and the tears started streaming down my face and all that kind of stuff, right? And then I hear one voice, as many, say, "We are not only your forefathers, we are also the forefathers of your solar system." And at that point, I wanted to ask more questions. Right?
You're like, hold on.
Yeah, exactly.
This?
And my guide says, "Nope, that's it. You got enough. You'll figure it out." And so back we came. So what unpacked from that for me was, okay, here's the macro version. Where's the micro? Proton, electron, and neutron. What's the power in that? The space is where the consciousness is, and the organizational capacity from a vibrational level. And even though the proton, electron, and neutron are all vibratory, what do they call them? The strings, right? And so this gave me, even more validation of how intricately things are woven in the consciousness that's available with that. And that happened in 1989.
Beautiful.
And it took 8 minutes to get there, 8 minutes to get back. And, so what's the speed of thought, if there is one? I did find a reference on it in the Urantia book, of all places, and it says it's 841 trillion miles per second.
In a time-space construct.
Yes.
Because outside of that, it's not necessary.
It appears, at least that's the theory, and I would verify that, yeah, it probably isn't, because you can blink, in the blink of an eye, you can have 1,000 things happen, right?
Which speaks to the fact that outside of that construct, it's impossible that it would have any kind of quantification, because quantification requires time and space. So it moves us out of that space. It's funny, as we're kind of wrapping this up, it dawns on me, the very first question you asked me was the origin point. And as you were sharing your story, I love how Spirit kind of circles us back around. I went on a very similar journey one time, a long time ago, and I was given the choice to come back or to not come back. And I didn't come back. And instead, from that point on, I figured out how to live here in that way. So I did it backwards. I remember that moment very clearly as you were explaining that. And I remember telling people that, and others in my life have had an experience of that awareness shifting, and then me kind of coming back in and coming back into awareness of that, but never abdicating ever again my consciousness to the avatar that I am.
Right.
And I believe that probably had a significant impact on how I've been able to put all this together.
Absolutely. And 100%, it goes back to your vision and being on the top of the various mountains and seeing others on the top of their own mountains. Because it doesn't really matter how we get there. No. The fact is that we are there.
That's right.
We learn to share from that place with each other, with the specific skill sets that we have, in order to integrate that perfected form, fit, and function in the world.
That's right. And how do you find yourself there? If you're wondering that, there are all kinds of processes, but at the end of the day, the secret is that you simply just claim it. There's an audacity in this that defies anything I've ever seen before, defies even the ego itself, to say, you know what? I think I'm just going to believe what everybody says who's gone there and back, that we are this and that we can live this way, and then just figure it out from there. And that means that every time you identify to yourself or reflect, or you see a reflection of something less than that, you acknowledge that our avatars run amok, and they do silly things. You atone for it, you clean it up, you fix it, whatever needs to happen there, but you don't lose sight of the fact that that's not who you are. You are training your avatar to be able to sync up with you in this walk. And when you can switch that, you know yourself undeniably as the divine, you will hold yourself to different standards and you will find the answers you're looking for. Seek ye first that, and you will get the information. My walk of faith has always been, as long as I'm willing to step when I'm told to step, I always get understanding. And that's how I do it.
That's a perfect close. And wow, so powerful. And I would also say to our audience, you don't have to believe it, just test it.
That's right.
It'll prove itself. And that's the whole story.
Due diligence, do your due diligence, do your psychic due diligence and your energetic due diligence, do all of it. You can, and you're capable, and you're powerful beyond measure.
Absolutely. And I'll have all your information and connect points in the description of this conversation. And it has been quite apocalyptic. And I thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the space and the container. And we love you and we love you all. Love each other.
Namaste and in la catch. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, and I will see you next time.